They told us the bombardment had softened them, that the Boche were broken, half mad with shelling. So at dawn, when the whistle blew, we climbed out of the trench and walked forward like it was a parade. It wasn't. The mud swallowed boots to the ankle, thick and stinking like rotted meat. Around us, the lads stepped over the twisted dead from the week before, faces bloated, eyes gone. Then came the guns, not ours, theirs. A wall of bullets erupted from the German line. They had waited, watched. Then they opened fire and men folded, dropped, screamed. Some just stopped moving like their wires had been cut. I watched a boy named Ellis get hit square in the chest. He stood there blinking, mouth open, then pitched forward into a pool of brown water. By noon, the sky looked bruised. Smoke curled across no man's land like it was alive. I was with the stretcher bearers, just a shovel and canvas between us and death. We crawled, dragging the screaming and the still ones alike. The ground sucked at our knees and hands, and the only warmth came from blood, ours or theirs. It didn't matter. We reached a broken trench, barely a dip in the ground, when the green mist rolled in. Gas. It hissed from shattered canisters like 1,000 whispering mouths. I held a rag to my face, but it was too late for some. Their throats seized. They clawed at their necks, eyes red and bulging. One man tore at his own face until it peeled. His last breath was a whimper. Night fell, and the shelling never stopped. Shards of metal rained down like iron hail. We huddled with the wounded, many of them too far gone to speak. One just stared at me, lips moving like he was praying, but no words came. I knew he was already gone, only waiting for his body to notice. We had no food, no heat. We couldn't risk lighting matches. In the silence between shell bursts, we could hear it, the moaning. Not from the wounded, not from the Germans, from the mud, from beneath it. Wet, slithering sounds like something shifting under the earth. We didn't speak of it. The second night, I tried to sleep. I closed my eyes and saw Ellis again. Only this time, he was moving, not walking, dragging. His jaw hung slack. Mud poured from the socket where his eye had been. I blinked and saw he was standing just outside the trench, as if waiting to be let in. I told myself it was a dream, but I wasn't asleep. They came again and again. Familiar faces twisted and wrong, crawling over the edge of the trench, arms shattered, skin shredded. One whispered my name, even though his jaw hung in pieces. I screamed. The others didn't. They just looked at me, like they'd seen the same thing. In the morning, the mist was thick, and Ellis was gone from the place he'd fallen. All that remained was his helmet, half buried, and a trail of drag marks leading back toward our trench. No man could have moved like that, but something had. The third night in that ruined line, I stopped trying to sleep. Not because of the shelling, it had become a kind of background music, but because of the whispers. It started with Murphy, a young lad from Yorkshire. He kept turning his head like someone was speaking to him just over his shoulder. Said it was Corporal Greer talking to him. But Greer had bled out in his arms the morning before, face torn away. We had wrapped him in his coat and laid him by the collapsed wall, but when I checked that night, he was gone. Not moved. Gone. The coat was there, soaked through, but nothing inside it. Murphy laughed a bit too long after that. I slapped him to shut him up. We couldn't afford to draw attention, but he just grinned with blood on his teeth and said he's cold. Then he stared into the darkness like it was listening. After that, none of us spoke. Not really. We just nodded, grunted, ate nothing, slept in short bursts, if at all. The gas still lingered, low and oily, stinging the eyes. One of the men coughed black for hours until he stopped altogether. When we moved him, his mouth was full of something pale and wet. Not blood, not foam. I didn't look too close. I knew better. We took turns digging graves at night. The earth was wrong. Every time the spade hit soil, there was a slickness beneath it. The frozen ground steamed faintly even though the air was cold. It smelled like a root cellar left to rot. We found bones, not fresh ones, blackened, burned, with no uniforms, no tags. I think they weren't our dead. The whispers grew louder. One night, as I carved out a shallow pit for two boys who hadn't made it through the last barrage, I heard a voice call my name, not shouted. Say it, soft, like a lover or a mother. Walter. It breathed just behind my right ear. I turned so fast I almost dropped the shovel. No one, only the trench wall, cracked and twitching in the wind. But then I saw it, a hand, just the fingers, pale and bloated, reaching from the packed earth. I backed away. The hand twitched, just once, like it was thinking. When I returned with another man to bury it, it was gone. That same night, Murphy disappeared. He was there when I blinked, then he wasn't. Left his boots behind, laces tied, just gone. We found footprints, bare ones in the mud outside the trench, deep and uneven like someone crawling. They led toward the old German line, where the ground smoked faintly even in the cold. We followed, of course. He was one of ours. We found his body before dawn. He'd been torn open from the inside, not clawed, split, like something had tried to wear him and failed. His eyes were intact, but blackened. His lips still moved even though he was dead. I swear it. We buried him deep. But I had the feeling it wouldn't hold. The next evening, I saw him again, standing past the trench wall, not moving, just watching. It wasn't Murphy anymore. It was just something using his shape. And it was smiling. By the fourth day, I couldn't tell if it was hunger, exhaustion, or something else eating at my mind. The trench didn't feel like a trench anymore. It felt like something's throat, narrow, damp, pulsing with rot. The walls sweated even when it was freezing. The smell had changed too. Less blood, more decay, like wet teeth behind a grin. We stopped burying the dead. There were too many, and they didn't stay. Private Dennings was the next to vanish. He was the quiet type, kept a small sketchbook. I found it near the latrine trench, its pages soaked and warped. Every page was filled with the same thing. Faces, his comrades, yes, but wrong. Hollow eyes, cracked mouths, open too wide. No names, just numbers. The last face was his own, but the mouth was missing, and something long and black was curled where the tongue should have been. He disappeared an hour after I found the book. We didn't even search. At night, the trench whispered constantly. We tried to muffle the sounds with cloth, with wax, with dirt in our ears. It didn't help. The voices didn't come through sound. They came through feeling. You could hear them in your bones. All was the same. Come closer, just a little closer. We remember you. I don't know what it meant, but the others, they started answering, one by one. Corporal Jensen stood up during a lull and walked out into no man's land, grinning like a child. He never flinched, not even when the flares lit him up. I swear, he waved, and then the mist swallowed him. He never screamed. The next morning, the ground behind us had shifted. Parts of the trench we dug, Gone, not collapsed, not shelled. Gone, just smoothed over like nothing had ever been there. Only we remembered it. And the earth, it had started breathing. Slow, heavy pulls of air through cracks in the ground. We could see the soil rise and fall, soft and rhythmic. Something was underneath, not digging, not crawling, waiting. Private Hensley went mad around then. He tried to bite through the barrel of his rifle. We stopped him, but only just. All he would say was, "It's speaking to me from the mud. It knows my name." That night, he drew a map in the dirt with shaking fingers, some kind of tunnel system spiraling in toward a center. He said it was below us, always had been, long before the war. Then he gouged out his ears. We tied him down with belts and wire. I wish we hadn't, because around midnight he started laughing, not like a man, but like something pretending to be one. He bent his back farther than bones allow. His eyes rolled white. And then something answered him. A low, wet moan echoed through the trench. Not human, not machine. It made my teeth hurt just hearing it. The wounded began to cry. One even crawled away on his hands, sobbing, blind from the gas, but desperate to be anywhere else. I envied him. The sound returned a second time, louder, closer, and when we looked back at Hensley, he was gone. Only the wire remained, snapped like thread, and the dirt where he'd laid was sunken in, as if something had pulled him straight down. We stayed awake after that, all of us, afraid of sleeping, afraid of hearing our names again. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment I was staring into the dirt, counting the breaths of the men still around me. 14, then 11, then maybe 5. And the next, the world had changed. The thunder of shelling had stopped, not eased, stopped. Total silence, not even the whine of distant artillery, no flares, no wind, just stillness, thick and absolute. I sat up. The trench was darker than night, but I could still see dim outlines like the air glowed faintly from beneath the mud. I called out. No one answered, not even an echo. I stood and looked around. There were shapes in the corners, unmoving, watching. Men, maybe, not mine. I walked. The trench stretched on forever, turn after turn past familiar places, now twisted. Our aid post sunk into the ground like a pit, the latrine trench sealed shut with dried blood. I found Davy's helmet, still filled with water, but the name scratched on the inside was mine. I should have run, but where? Something had changed in me too. The air felt warm, like breath on the back of the neck. And every few steps I heard footsteps just behind mine, matching perfectly. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned, nothing. But I swear I could feel them grinning. Then I found the tunnel, a fresh breach just behind the comms trench, not made by shovels. It pulsed like something alive. I don't know why I went in. I just knew I had to. My legs didn't belong to me anymore. They obeyed something deeper than fear. Inside, the walls were close and wet. Mud clung to my fingers like skin. The deeper I went, the more I heard it. The hum, low, almost like a heartbeat. And beneath it, the voices again. Not whispers this time, breathing my thoughts before I had them. They knew me. They remembered my mother's voice, the way I looked as a boy. They spoke in the tone of my old captain, of Ellis, of Murphy. They spoke in my own voice, begging me to stop. I didn't. I reached a chamber at the end, round and wide. The walls pulsed, and there, in the center, it waited. Not a shape, not a thing with eyes or limbs, just a cavity in the earth that should not have been there. A hunger, the source. It wasn't made of teeth or claws, but absence. A place where men went and didn't return the same, or didn't return at all. Around it were bodies, dozens, faces I knew, others I didn't. Some alive, twitching, half buried and murmuring secrets to the dirt. Some staring with eyes as black as the void they surrounded. I stepped closer. I don't know why. I think it wanted me to. Then something moved beneath my feet. Slow, wrapping around my boots like roots. I looked down. Hands, countless hands reaching from the mud, pulling gently, lovingly, as if to say, "We missed you." I didn't scream. I just watched as one of them lifted my own face from the dirt and smiled with it. Story 2. They said the city would hold. Even as the black columns of smoke crawled up from the forests outside Leningrad, even as the windows rattled from distant shelling, they told us it would hold. My father believed them. He was still reporting to the munitions factory every morning, boots cracked open at the toes, scarf wrapped twice around his face to hide the way his jaw had caved in from hunger. I used to watch him go, the frost clinging to his shoulders like a burial shroud. The cold had teeth. It bit through wool and skin and memories. Pipes froze, walls cracked, and silence spread like frostbite through the streets. No birds anymore, no barking dogs. They were the first to vanish, then the rats, then the neighbors. We stayed in our apartment, a sagging box of bone-colored ice and broken glass. My mother boiled books for heat, stacked chairs in the stove when we ran out of firewood, scraped paste from the wallpaper for soup. She used to be a singer in the Philharmonic Hall. Her voice once lifted men from sorrow. Now she couldn't speak above a whisper. By December, the wind had turned. It didn't howl anymore. It watched. I'd stand at the window listening to the distant rumble of shells, the quiet drag of something too tired to walk properly. The city was starving, yes, but it was also changing. Our upstairs neighbor, Mr. Petrov, stopped coming down to check on us. He had a wife and 2 sons once. One day, he came to our door and asked to borrow a knife. Mama didn't ask what for. Everyone had their reasons. A few days later, we smelled something sweet and foul leaking through the floorboards. We never saw him again. The worst part wasn't the hunger. It was the waiting. The radio still worked some days. Garbled transmissions, news from the front. But none of it mattered. Outside, death stood at our doorstep, knocking with frozen knuckles. I started dreaming of things that had no face. Long gray shapes standing silently at the end of the hallway. My sister Vera said I was imagining things, but she was getting thinner by the hour. Her cheeks had hollowed out into strange, sharp ridges. One night, I caught her chewing on a belt, the leather strings sticking to her lips like jerky. The wind scraped at the windows, and the walls creaked like they were remembering warmer days. One night, Mama shook me awake. "Don't open the door," she whispered, "no matter what you hear." That night, someone knocked, not once, but 13 times. Even now, I remember the rhythm, slow, deliberate, like it knew we were listening. We stayed huddled by the stove, its belly cold and empty, holding our breath. The next morning, Vera was gone. No footprints in the hall, no sound of the door, just the image of her bed, neatly made, with a thin handprint smeared on the frosted window pane above it. I asked Mama where she went. She didn't answer. She just started burning her sheet music. Somewhere in that endless white silence, something had begun to feed, and it had learned to knock. They say that hunger changes the body. That's true. But no one talks about how it changes the rules. Time stops ticking the same way. Days blur, names fade, memories slip through your fingers like ash. But the sound, that knocking, remained every night without fail. 13 slow-spaced knocks on the door. After Vera vanished, the cold seemed to press in harder. Mama sat in silence most of the day, staring at the stove that hadn't seen fire in weeks. Her lips were cracked, and her fingers bled at the tips from tearing apart wooden furniture for kindling. But she refused to speak of Vera. She acted like she'd never existed. I tried asking the neighbors, but doors didn't open anymore. There were no more questions. People had turned inward, as if afraid to say something that might summon the wrong thing. Even footsteps had grown quieter. One morning, while foraging for anything we could boil, leaves, glue, even an old pair of shoes, I found a child's mitten in the snow. Just one. Bright red, barely buried. Inside it, a finger, frozen solid like glass. I didn't scream. You stop screaming after the third or fourth body you see left against a wall, upright, like they just sat down to rest and never stood again. That night, the knocking came again, 13 times. But this time, something else followed, a whisper, not in a language I knew, just breath and shapes, words without words. Mama bolted up from her sleep and shoved her hand over my mouth. Her eyes weren't her own. They were wide, empty, like glass marbles. "We don't answer," she said, "no matter what." But I wanted to know. I had to know. I stayed awake, ear to the wall, and I heard it, breathing just outside the door, slow and shuddering, like a wind dragging itself across a grave. Then the scratching began, low, rhythmic, a single finger or claw or nail dragging across wood like it was tracing letters. Then silence. By morning, Mama was gone. Her bed undisturbed, her shoes still by the door, but the window, the same window where Vera's print had been, was frosted again, and in it this time were two handprints, one small, one large, side by side. I ran through the city, hoping to find her, but the streets had become something else. The sky was bruised purple. Smoke hung low, unmoving. People walked like shadows, faces wrapped in cloth and hollowed out beyond recognition. I passed a man chewing a strip of newspaper soaked in something oily. He didn't even look at me. In the square near the burned-out library, I saw it. Not my mother, not Vera, something else. It stood with its back to me, tall, colorless, vaguely shaped like a person under many coats. But the coats didn't move in the wind. The air around it felt wrong, too quiet, too cold, like the moment just before ice cracks beneath your feet. And in its hand, it held a mitten, red, tiny. I stepped back. It didn't move, but I knew it had heard me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the door, clutching the only knife we had left. When the knocking came, 13 times, same rhythm, I held my breath. But there was no whisper this time, just a voice. "Your turn." My hands are shaking as I write this. The frost is eating the ink, but I have to record it in case someone finds this, in case someone hears it too. Whatever's out there in the white, it isn't starvation, it's not war, it's older than both, and it's learning our names. I don't remember when I stopped using my name, not aloud, not in my head. Something about it made me feel exposed, like if I said it again, it would say it back. And that's what it wants. Names, names, and doors. By now, I had moved into the basement of an abandoned printing house near the Fontanka. There were no windows down there, and that felt safer. Safer from the knocking, from the handprints, from what walked when the rest of us could barely crawl. I'd made a small nest behind rusted machines, burnt books for warmth, cloth ripped from curtains, and a shard of mirror I covered with rags at night. I didn't want to see what might be looking back. It wasn't just happening to me. I began to hear about others. Whispers in the bread line. What was left of it? People vanishing without a trace. Doors opening on their own. Entire apartments left undisturbed, yet emptied of occupants. One woman muttered about her son walking in circles at night, answering to voices only he could hear. He disappeared a week later, shoes left at the foot of the bed, and on the wall behind him, 13 scratches, perfectly spaced. They called it the White Silence. Some said it was starvation. Some said it was madness. But deep down, they knew. There was something else feeding in this siege, something older than war, hungrier than man. One afternoon, I went looking for a girl named Katia, who had shared a can of glue with me weeks earlier. She lived in a building 3 blocks south. I hadn't seen her in days. Her door was ajar. The apartment was too quiet, as if all the sound had been peeled away. There were plates set on the table, nothing on them, just bone-white porcelain like ribs. In the corner, sitting cross-legged, was a man I didn't know. His skin was tight, papery. His mouth was open too wide. "Did you answer it?" I whispered. He smiled, slowly. "Everyone does." Behind him, Katya's coat lay on the floor. Inside the sleeve, a folded note. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe I hoped it would explain something. Maybe I was just cold. It read, "It comes for the hungry first. It makes them listen. Then it makes them answer." The man stood. I ran. I didn't look back to see if he followed. I already knew he wouldn't leave that room. He was part of it now. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body ached from cold, and the wind carried voices, not language, tone, software beckoning, like family calling from another room. The knocking came again. 13. I held my breath, but then a sound I hadn't heard before. Someone else answering back. Not far. A door opening. Slowly. A gasp. And then silence. The next morning, the printing house was colder, the shadows longer. I found a small package at the base of the door. Inside it, teeth, human, tiny, as if a child had left them behind like forgotten buttons. I didn't cry, not anymore. Instead, I opened the shard of mirror. I needed to see. My face was there, barely, hollow, fading, and then something else behind me, standing still, watching. I turned, nothing, but the frost on the wall now held 3 handprints. I began to understand. This thing didn't just feed on flesh. It fed on isolation, on silence, on surrender. It turned people into echoes of themselves, empty shells that opened the door when no one else would. I would not open it, not yet, but it was patient, and it had already taken my name. The cold had turned sharp, like it had grown teeth. Wind didn't blow anymore. It whispered slow and deliberate, curling through broken windows and cracked walls like it was searching for someone specific. The sky hadn't changed in days, just that same iron gray that pressed down on the city like a lid sealing something in or keeping something out. The streets were empty, not silent, just emptied of the right sounds. Footsteps had become hesitant, brittle. Even the rats had vanished. People moved like paper dolls, jerky and half-folded, avoiding eye contact, keeping their heads down. We didn't talk anymore, not with words, just gestures, glances. That was safer. The handprints grew. They were appearing in more places now. Walls, doors, the insides of cabinets, always in threes, always wet with frost, even when there hadn't been any moisture for days. Sometimes they were smeared across glass, like whatever made them had pressed its face there too, looking in or out. I passed a building on Litany Prospect where every window was open despite the sub-zero cold. Curtains fluttered like fingers. Someone said they found 23 people inside, all sitting upright at their tables facing the walls. Their eyes had been frozen open. No wounds, no signs of violence, just silence, and handprints above every door. At night, the knocking changed. It no longer came to my door, it came to others. 13 knocks, then quiet, then another door. 13, then another. The sound spread like footsteps through the city, and I realized it wasn't searching anymore. It was choosing. I saw a woman near the Neva chase her shadow, her real one. It had detached at her feet and slipped around a corner, and she followed it like it had a face she knew. She never came back. In the barracks where the children used to sleep, something had begun to hum. Not music, just one long trembling note, like a wire stretched too tight. It only stopped when someone answered it. Then a door would creak open, and after that, only frost. I stopped eating, not by choice. I just didn't feel hunger anymore. It was like that part of me had already been eaten. What was left was thin and dry and always cold, even under the rags. I didn't sleep much. The dreams came too loud. One night, I wandered back to the apartment where Mama had disappeared. I don't know why. Maybe I thought something of her would still be there, a memory, a warmth. The door was gone, not broken, not removed, just gone, as if the wall had healed over it. But on the wallpaper, 3 new handprints had bloomed, and beneath them, written in soot, "It remembers." In the stillness, I heard breathing, not mine, not close, just everywhere, like the city had lungs now. And I understood something I hadn't before. It had grown from us, from the fear, the silence, the surrender. It had shaped itself out of everything we left behind, and it was no longer outside. The wind came from within the buildings now, from the stairwells, from the cracks in the walls. The frost moved across ceilings like spilled ink. I saw my name written in it once, full, letter by letter, across the floorboards of the old print house, as if I'd spoken it in my sleep and the city had listened. I scratched it out with a nail. I tried to leave Leningrad. I walked through what was left of the Southern Road. The Road of Life, they had called it. But the trees were wrong. They leaned inward, their branches bare but wet, as if they were breathing too. I walked for hours and always came back to the same place. The city wasn't letting me go. I stayed underground after that. I stopped writing in the walls, stopped counting the handprints. The frost came quicker now. It learned where to find me, and tonight I heard the knock, not on my door, not even on the walls, from inside. 13 beats in my own chest, slow, heavy, rhythmic, as if something was waiting to be let out, or to finish becoming me. I held still. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe, because when the city breathes back, it doesn't need a door. Story 3. Even in the daylight, nothing felt alive near Vimy Ridge. The shattered villages sagged like corpses, and the trenches themselves breathed rot. Mud swallowed everything, boots, bones, and sometimes men whole. I was Private Edward Tolland, 7th Battalion, and in April of 1917, I had stopped believing in ghosts. You couldn't believe in anything out here. It was our third night without sleep. Shell fire had pounded the ridge since dusk. I'd been digging out a supply tunnel with Carson, a wiry lad from Guelph who never talked unless he had to. He had a photograph of his fiancée wrapped in oilskin, kept tucked beneath his jacket. He never looked at it unless he thought no one was watching. We were told to dig and rest in turns. Carson curled up in a timberline dugout first. I watched over him, slumped against the wall, drifting in and out. It was in that half-sleep that I felt them. Warm hands, not rough or rushed, but firm. They shook me gently, like how my mother used to when I'd overslept before harvest. I blinked. The hands belonged to a face I knew. It was Thomas, my brother. But Thomas had died in Ypres, bayoneted in the chest, 1915. I buried him myself behind a burned-out chapel, wrapped in canvas and mud. And yet there he stood, in the gloom of the dugout, face hollowed and pale but whole. His eyes met mine, and though his mouth never moved, I understood. Follow me. Without a word, I stumbled after the figure, across the trench, through coils of rusted wire, out into no man's land. The night was thick and silent. Not a single flare lit the sky. My boots squelched through mud and water, then found firmer ground near the splintered remains of a farmhouse, the one our maps called the Finger Bone because of its pointed chimney. There, Thomas stopped. He turned, and just as I opened my mouth to speak, he was gone. I stood alone in the cold, heart slamming against my ribs, my breath fogged. The silence became unbearable. I collapsed to my knees behind a broken wall, shivering. I must have passed out. When I came to, dawn was a dirty yellow smear on the horizon. I staggered back toward our trench and froze. Where our dugout had been, there was nothing but a crater. Smoke spiraled into the morning air. Timber jutted from the earth like snapped bones. I ran, screamed, dug with my hands until they bled. Carson was gone. All of them were. The blast had hit directly, tearing through the tunnel like paper. Not one had made it out. I stood there until someone pulled me away. They asked how I'd survived. I told them I couldn't remember, but I did. I remembered the warm hands, the silent beckon, the face I hadn't seen in 2 years. Thomas. And for the first time in months, I was afraid. Not of shells, not of dying, but of what else might be waiting for me in the mud, things the living could no longer see. And that night, I didn't sleep. I didn't dare. After the crater, they moved me down the line. No wounds, they said, no visible ones. But I didn't argue. I didn't tell them about Thomas. They sent me to a quieter sector west of Givenchy, though quiet was just another lie. The gun still whispered through the night, and the sky flickered with distant flashes like a sick heartbeat. I was given a bunk in an abandoned farmhouse just behind the forward trench, what was left of it. The place had been shelled weeks before. Roof half gone, rafters hanging like snapped tendons, but it was drier than the trenches. That first night, I thought maybe I'd finally rest. I didn't. They put me on watch with a man named Harker. Tall, silent hands like fence posts. He'd seen the song. I could tell. By the way, he never turned his back on the dark. We took turns patrolling the fence line and the narrow trench that circled the farmhouse. But something was wrong with the place. The ground was too quiet. No birds, no rats even. Around midnight, I stood by the edge of the ruined yard when I heard it, shuffling footsteps on broken glass. I turned, rifle raised. No one. "Harker!" I hissed. No answer. I stepped through the hollow frame of a doorway and saw him. not Harker. 4 soldiers, standing shoulder to shoulder in the wreckage of the old sitting room. Their backs were straight, chins lifted, rifles held upright against their chests. Not moving, not breathing. Their uniforms were British, but too clean, faces pale, like wax. I whispered again. Nothing. I took a step forward, and my boot cracked something beneath it. In an instant, they were gone. I blinked. The room was empty, just torn wallpaper, shattered glass, and the cold stench of rot. I backed out, heart clawing its way into my throat. Then Harker appeared at the edge of the shadows. He said nothing, just stared at me for a long second before muttering, "You saw them." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He looked away, jaw tight. They show up same time every night, always facing east, like they're waiting. Waiting for what? I asked. He didn't reply. The next night, I sat by the fireplace, or what was left of it, and waited. Around midnight, I saw them again. Same place, same posture, but this time, one of them turned his head, just slightly, as though he'd heard me breathing, and then something cold brushed past me from behind. I spun around. No one. But the warmth in my chest was gone, replaced by something hollow, like I'd left a door open behind my ribs. For the rest of that shift, I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe more than I had to. By morning, Harker and I didn't speak. We didn't need to. He handed me a folded page, yellowed, burned at the corners. A casualty list from 1915, 4 names, circled in pencil, a note scrawled beneath it. Still standing watch. He left that day, transferred out. I stayed, because something told me those soldiers weren't watching for the enemy. They were waiting for someone else. And I was beginning to think it might be me. I stopped asking for transfer after Harker left. I think part of me knew it wouldn't help. Wherever I went, they would find me again. The men in my new unit called it the sighing post, an old lookout on the ridge just south of the farmhouse where I'd first seen the standing ghosts. The name came from the sound, not wind, not shells, but long, drawn-out breaths that echoed through the trench line at night. Sometimes they came in twos, like someone speaking just below hearing. Sometimes they came from inside the dugouts. It was in that place I met Larnier, a sapper from Montreal. Young, jumpy. He didn't sleep much either. On our 3rd night at the post, we were filling sandbags when he muttered, "Do you hear them?" I paused. "What do you mean?" "The ones who whisper. They're behind the wall." I looked toward the trench face. Dirt and wood, nothing else. I almost told him he was tired, imagining things, but I'd heard it too. Later, after midnight, we sat back to back near the listening post. The wind had dropped. That's when the whispering began again. Low, breathy syllables you couldn't quite understand. And this time, it wasn't coming from behind the wall. It was under our feet. We stood fast, neither of us speaking. My hands felt numb. Slowly, I knelt, pressed my ear to the frozen mud floor. There were voices below, dozens, not shouting, not moaning, just talking, calmly, steadily, like a briefing before dawn. But the post map said there were no tunnels beneath that section, no mines, nothing. Larnier wouldn't go back in after that. He stood in the trench all night, shaking. Tried to sleep but failed. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of boots walking just past my head, of whispers threading into my ears like steam. The next day, Larnier was gone, disappeared during his shift. They said he must have wandered into the wire, maybe shell shock, maybe worse. But I knew better. They took him. The same night, I found something scratched into the inside wall of our dugout. A message burned by fingernail or knife. Under us, still waiting. I dug there the next evening. I had to know. Shallow at first, then deeper. 6 inches, then 12. I hit wood. Old, rotted. A box? No. A beam. From an old trench? A buried tunnel? No. It was a coffin lid, except it hadn't been buried by accident. I uncovered more, 5, 6 of them, all stacked beneath the mud like forgotten cargo. No names, no tags, just crude crosses carved into the tops. I pulled one open, empty, every single one, empty. That night, I sat against the wall with my rifle and lamp. I didn't sleep, I didn't speak, but I listened. And when the whispering returned, louder than before, I finally understood what they were saying. Not English, not French, but names. Our names, mine, Larnier, Harker's, one by one, like a list, a roll call. They weren't haunting the trenches. They were counting us. By the second week of March, the whispering stopped. But that wasn't a relief. It felt more like the moment before a mine goes off. We were rotated back toward the front, and they stationed me near the same ruined farmhouse where I'd first seen Thomas, or whatever wore his face. The crater was still there, shallow now, as if the earth had begun to swallow it. I didn't tell the new boys. What was the point? They laughed enough on their own, even if the laughter always died by midnight. I couldn't sleep anymore. My mind circled the names, the whispering, the empty boxes beneath the trench. That's when the scratching started. It came from the beams above, in the far corner of the loft, where no one went. Too unstable, they said. It sounded like nails on wood, slow and steady, like someone trying to carve their way out. Private Owens, the youngest of us, said he dreamed of men without eyes watching him from under the floor. Said they didn't speak, just reached up through the dirt, always just before morning. 3 days later, he put his rifle in his mouth and pulled the trigger. He wasn't the last. They didn't bury Owens right away. We didn't have time. His body was left behind the farmhouse wall, wrapped in his coat, tagged and stiff. By the next morning, he was gone. No drag marks, no prints, just his helmet left behind, crushed flat. After that, I stopped writing home. I knew somehow that no letter from that place would make it past the fog. Then the shadows changed. They began moving backward. You'd turn to face the moonlight, and your shadow would stretch toward the light instead of away. And in the evenings, the air grew thick. Breathing became like drinking water. We stopped hearing birds. Then we stopped hearing the guns. Only the silence remained. And then came the knocking. Not artillery, not boots. Knocking from below. 3 soft taps like on a door. Always just behind you. One night, I followed it. I had to. I stepped out of the trench and crossed no man's land under a silent sky. No flares, no wind, not even the creak of the boards underfoot. The air was still, but I felt movement, not from ahead, from beneath. At the farmhouse, something had changed. The ruins stood taller than I remembered. The shadows inside shifted even without light. I walked to where I'd first seen Thomas. The wall had crumbled since, revealing a staircase I'd never noticed. It led down, too steep, too narrow, too deep. I descended. The deeper I went, the warmer it grew. Not comforting warmth, stifling, breathless, wet. The air pulsed like lungs exhaling around me. At the bottom, I saw them, not ghosts, not soldiers, figures, shapes in uniform, but wrong, eyes missing, arms too long, some crouched like animals, some stood with backs arched too far, spines bending in unnatural angle, and all of them waiting. For what? I didn't ask, because I knew. They weren't trapped. They weren't haunting. They were building something, replacing us. One turned toward me, its skull split in the middle like a grin. It stepped forward. I raised my rifle and froze. It was wearing my coat, my number, my name tag. I didn't scream because I felt it behind me. A warm hand resting gently on my shoulder, the same touch from the dugout that night. I turned my head, but no one was there, only breath, breath that wasn't mine. Story 4. I didn't believe in ghosts until the war. Not the ones in white sheets, no. I mean the real kind, the ones that crawl inside a man's head and take up residence. The kind that stink of mud and cordite and never stop whispering. They lived out there, somewhere beyond the lip of the trench, in the churned up chalk and broken bodies. I swear to you, some of them were still walking. It was the summer of 1916, and I was stationed just outside Thiepval. The bombardment never stopped, day or night, and after a while, the air itself felt bruised. I was a private then, green, barely 2 months in, and they put me on listening post duty with a man named Colby. Colby had already gone quiet by the time I met him. Not the usual sullen soldier silence, no. He was too still. His eyes never blinked enough, and he'd flinch at the scrape of a shovel. The others didn't talk to him much, but they never sent him back. Maybe they were afraid to. It was just after midnight when we took our shift together in the forward sap. No moon. Rain fell like pins. We sat in the dugout, a narrow slit cut into the chalky ground, barely room to breathe. Colby didn't speak, didn't move. I tried to make conversation, asked him if he was from Leeds or Sheffield, whether he thought the Fritz would make a push before morning. Nothing. He just kept staring into the dark, like something was staring back. At some point, I must have dozed off, Colby began humming. Not a tune, really, just sounds. Then words formed. Under the old apple tree, his voice was flat and tuneless, like a phonograph played backward. It made my skin crawl. I whispered for him to stop. He didn't. The words twisted as he sang, warped into something I didn't recognize. He sang of someone hanging from the apple tree, of bones in bloom and eyes like worms. I wanted to shout at him, but I couldn't speak. My voice just died in my throat. Something about the way he stared out into no man's land, as if he was answering a call no one else heard. Then came the footsteps. I heard them crunching over the shattered earth just beyond our position. But there'd been no whistle, no shell burst, just the rhythmic squelch of boots in the mud, slow and steady. I gripped my rifle. Colby stood. He rose like a puppet, limbs jerky and stiff, and climbed up out of the trench without a word. I followed. God help me, I followed. The rain turned to mist, swallowing everything. Colby walked ahead of me into the fog, still singing as if pulled by some invisible thread. That's when I saw him. The man was naked, but for his boots, skin pale and filthy, arms stiff at his sides like a marionette. His face, if you could call it that, was slack and gray, jaw open, far too wide. His eyes didn't blink. I couldn't even tell if he was alive. Colby walked straight up to him and stopped, just stood there, nose to nose with the thing, singing that broken lullaby. The mist churned between them like it breathed. Then the pale man opened his mouth wider. Not to speak, no sound came, but it was like watching something climb out of him, a presence, a pressure in the air. My ears popped. I dropped to my knees, retching, as blood trickled from my nose. When I looked up, both were gone. I crawled back to the trench alone. No one believed me when I said Colby vanished. They found his boots by the wire, empty, and said he probably deserted. But the next night, I heard him again, faintly, from out past the parapet, singing. Same words, same voice, and sometimes when the guns are quiet, I still hear it now. They say ghosts don't bleed, but I know better. I bled with one. They sent me back to the same sector a week later. No reason given, just a bark from the captain and a paper with my name on it. I didn't argue. You didn't, not unless you wanted to spend a night tied to a gun carriage. So I packed my gear and marched back toward Thiepval, toward the place I swore I'd never return. I told myself I wouldn't look for Colby. Not really. But every time I passed a crater or stepped over a half-buried boot, my eyes drifted toward the mist, waiting for a silhouette to stumble out humming that cursed tune. The forward post had changed. It was quieter, too quiet. The lads there hardly spoke, and their eyes darted like birds. Something had gone wrong. I could feel it. The air was tense, like the moment before a storm. My new bunkmate was Ellis. Short, jittery, chain smoked through the rations. The first night, he muttered in his sleep. Not words, just wet, stuttering syllables. I shook him awake once, and he clawed at my face before realizing where he was. Next morning, I asked what he'd dreamed about. Same thing every time, he said, voice raw. The earth's breathing. It pulls you under if you listen too long. He wasn't joking. I didn't know what he meant until I pulled listening post duty again. It was a shallow trench, some 20 yards ahead of our line, barely enough cover for 2 men. The other soldier, a lad called Hemsley, was already there when I arrived. He was pale and glassy-eyed, gripping his Lee Enfield like a crucifix. He didn't say much, only nodded and pointed to the field mic. It started last night, he muttered. I took the headset. It was supposed to pick up movement, digging, troop shifts, the clink of tools, but all I heard was a low, rhythmic thumping. At first I thought it was artillery in the distance, but it was too steady, almost organic. It reminded me of a heartbeat. Then it changed. I froze. A whisper, dry and brittle, filtered through the earpiece, soft as wind and dead leaves. Under the old apple tree. I ripped the headset off. Hemsley stared at me, wide-eyed. You heard it too? I didn't answer. I just looked at the earth around us, chalky, wet, crawling with worms, and felt something watching, not from the German line, from below. That night, Ellis vanished, left his boots, same as Colby. His cot was soaked with mud, but there'd been no rain. No one saw him leave. We searched, of course, grid by grid, bayonet in hand, calling his name into the fog. But it was hopeless. Too many craters, too many shadows. 3 nights later, we got a runner, some poor sod trembling worse than the shells. He brought us a message, said he'd come from the next trench up. He wouldn't stop staring at the ground. They're digging again, he whispered, but it's not the enemy. Something's tunneling under us. I don't remember sleeping after that. On my next shift, I brought the field mic with me into the dugout. I just needed to know, needed to prove I hadn't imagined it. This time, there were 2 voices. One was Colby's, recognizable even in that hollow, dead tone. The other, the other voice didn't sound human at all. It didn't speak in words, not at first, just garbled clicks, a wet grinding like bone on metal. Then it rasped, "Dig, dig, dig, till you sleep where you stood." I dropped the mic and ran. Back at the trench, the others wouldn't meet my eyes. I think they knew. I think they'd heard it too. I begged the captain to reassign me. He refused, told me the forward post needed strong nerves. I nearly laughed. Strong nerves, as if we had any left. That night, we found Hemsley's body folded inside a collapsed dugout. Only it wasn't collapsed. It had been opened from underneath. His face was twisted in terror, his mouth full of chalk and fingernail scratches. His hands clutched something so tight we had to break his fingers to get it out. A small apple branch, still fresh, still green. After Hemsley's death, something shifted. The trenches felt narrower. The mud seemed deeper. The whispers never really stopped anymore, not even during shell fire. The others tried to act normal, but I could see it in their eyes. We all knew something beneath us was moving. I started keeping a journal. Nothing elaborate, just notes, times, voices, names. I logged Ellis, Colby, Hemsley, drew a shaky map of where they were last seen. I didn't even know why I was doing it, only that it felt necessary. Like if I didn't keep track, they would. It was Corporal Lane who started patrolling the shell holes at night. Said he was looking for deserters. He was one of those old regulars, square jaw, hands like bricks, never talked about the war like it was happening now. To him, it was still some kind of game. But then Lane came back wrong. It was just before dawn. The mist was so thick you couldn't see the sandbags unless you touched them. He staggered in past the wire, arms at his sides like dead weight, boots caked in clay. At first, no one noticed anything off. Just figured he was tired. But when someone asked where he'd been, Lane didn't speak. He just smiled, too wide, and sat down like a doll. We tried shaking him. No response. The medics came. They said he was catatonic. His eyes were open, but there was nothing in them. They laid him on a stretcher. That's when we saw it. His uniform was wet, not with rain, but something thicker. Pale gray ooze clung to the fabric, sticky as sap. When they pulled off his greatcoat, we all stepped back. His chest was hollow, not wounded, not crushed, emptied. His ribs bent inward like someone had reached inside and scooped everything out. But there was no blood, no wound, just that cold, pulsing ooze dripping from his skin like sweat. We burned his kit that night. No one asked permission. No one reported it. After that, half the lads stopped sleeping altogether. The night before our next rotation, I heard shovels in the distance, not like the engineers, not methodical, but frantic, like something was digging toward us fast and desperate. I followed the sound. I don't know why. I think some part of me already knew what I'd find. Past the sandbags, just near a half-collapsed crater, I saw them. Not Germans, not alive. 4 men stood waist-deep in the chalk, eyes glassy and still, uniform shredded, jaws slack. One of them was Ellis. Another might have been Lane. They weren't digging with tools. They were clawing into the ground with bare hands. One of them looked up as I approached. That's when I saw it. Not rage, not hunger. Recognition. He knew me. Ellis opened his mouth, mud spilling out, and sang in a voice thin as radio static, "Under the old apple tree." My legs turned to ice. Then they all turned toward me. Their mouths opened wider than they should have. Jawbones creaked. One by one, they reached out, not running, not shouting, just walking slow and steady, like they had all the time in the world. I ran, back through the mist, back past the post. Didn't stop until I was behind the lines, retching bile onto my boots. I told the officers I'd fallen into a gas pocket. They sent me to a field tent with bandages over my eyes. Didn't matter, I could still hear them, clawing, singing. When they finally let me go, they transferred me to signals. Said I was unstable for trench work. I didn't argue. I never went near the line again. But that night, as I lay awake in the dry tent, warm and safe, I heard the soft crunch of boots just outside. A whisper came through the canvas wall. "You forgot someone." I stayed awake until morning, clutching my journal. I wasn't afraid of the enemy anymore. I was afraid of who I used to serve with. Because they weren't buried. They were still digging. I made it through the war. That's what they said in the hospital. I was discharged with trembling hands and a citation I never opened. They told me I was lucky, that I should be proud, that the war was behind me now. They didn't understand a damn thing. The mud never left my boots. Even in the dry London streets, I felt it caked behind my toes, thick, wet, chalky. Sometimes I catch myself humming under my breath, never full lyrics. Just that one cursed phrase, "Under the old apple tree." I stopped sleeping. When I closed my eyes, I didn't dream of the war. I heard it. The mic's static. The voice that wasn't a voice. The scraping, the digging. My neighbors began to complain. Said they heard noises coming from my flat at night. Shovels in the floorboards. They said I was scratching in my sleep, murmuring in tongues. I knew what it meant. They'd followed me home. I moved, tried to disappear into the countryside someplace quiet. I rented a small cottage near a former training field, grass long since grown over. No one knew me there. I kept to myself, dug up the garden out of habit. That was my first mistake. The second was thinking I could forget them. One night, I woke up to a smell I hadn't known in years, wet chalk and rot. It came through the floorboards like smoke. I followed it to the cellar and found mud seeping through the cracks in the stone, not dripping, rising. I backed away. My foot hit something, not a stone, something soft. I turned. It was Ellis, his face pale, skin drawn tight like paper stretched over bone, lips coated in gray dust. He didn't move. He just stared, mouth hanging open like he was still trying to sing. Behind him, Lane, Hemsley, Colby, all of them, standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark, silent, still, until I heard it. That sound, not voices, not breathing, digging, from below. I screamed, ran, didn't stop until I was halfway through the woods, panting, barefoot, bleeding, but there was no safety, not anymore. The chalk had followed me. I started seeing trenches where there weren't any, in the fields, in the corners of the room. Sometimes they were just shadows in the wallpaper, but other times they were real, damp, crawling, and I could hear them whispering to me. Every night they got closer. One evening, I awoke to find dirt under my nails and a spade in my hands. I didn't remember where I'd gone. My feet were raw. My mouth tasted like earth. I dug a hole behind the house, 6 feet down, perfectly square, no memory of it. But the next night, I saw a boot at the bottom, half buried, familiar. I tried to burn my uniform. It wouldn't catch. It was wet, as though it had been buried all along. I stayed up with a revolver one night, waiting for the voices. They didn't come from outside. They rose from beneath my chair, from beneath me. Dig, dig, come back down. The next morning, I was in the garden again, but this time I wasn't alone. There were 5 holes, perfectly aligned, no shovel in sight, just muddy handprints on the rim of each. I tried to write a letter to someone, anyone, but the paper stayed blank. My hand shook too much. The only words I could manage were, "We never left. We only went deeper." I think they're waiting for me now. The ones who dug too deep. The ones who heard the voice and couldn't stop listening. They're patient. They remember the sound of shell fire and screaming earth. And they remember me. Tonight, the floorboards are wet again. The air smells like chalk. My boots are by the door. Story 5. They said it would be quiet that morning, no patrols, no shelling. The sky was soft and gray like it always was in Flanders, and the damp in the air made the trench walls slick as ice. I had just lit a cigarette with trembling fingers when it started. Not the usual shell whistle or the crack of rifles. No, this was different. At first, we thought it was just morning mist rolling in, curling above the fields like some lazy spirit. But it was too thick, too deliberate. From the rim of the trench, I caught the first glimpse, a green-yellow cloud sliding across no man's land like something alive. It didn't move like fog. It crept with purpose. I remember the silence, how all noise seemed to hold its breath for one stretched heartbeat. Then came the hiss, a terrible hissing whisper like a kettle boiling over in hell. That's when the screaming began. I shouted down the line, "Gas! Gas!" But we had nothing. No masks, no protection, only rags, if that. My sergeant yelled for us to piss on cloth and tie it around our mouths. I did it without thinking, holding the foul-smelling rag tight as the yellow wall swept in. It was like being punched by the sky itself. One breath, and my throat closed. My lungs turned to fire. I saw boys, men I'd shared biscuits with the night before, fall writhing, clawing at their own faces. Some staggered blindly, eyes leaking thick tears, coughing blood into the mud. The chlorine was heavier than air. It sank, filled every low corner. If you crouched, you died faster. So we stood, choking, gasping, as our skin itched and peeled beneath the haze. One man, I think his name was Harris, was trying to sing, of all things, just a lullaby. His voice gurgled into nothing, and he crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. Beside him, Jenkins vomited blood and collapsed into the trench floor, twitching. I turned away, but there was nowhere to run. The fog was everywhere, thick enough to bite. The wind finally shifted, not quickly enough. Dozens had already dropped, and the trench floor was slick with bile and bodies. A few of us were still standing, blinking through tears, barely breathing. We stumbled over the dead and dying toward the aid post. The air behind us still reeked of chlorine, and the cries stayed long after the cloud moved on. They never warned us war would smell like this, like bleach and death, like burning from the inside out, like the end of something you never knew had begun. And that was just the first hour. They told us not to look back, but we always did. We were moved to a stretch just west of Saint-Julien the day after the gas first hit. The trench line still held barely, but the stench traveled before the stories did. Men who had survived the first wave didn't talk much. When they did, it was through blistered lips and hoarse gasps, eyes glazed as if they were already half buried. I was part of a group sent to reinforce the line, but what we found didn't look like a line at all. It looked like a slaughterhouse. The walls were smeared with blood and bile. Bits of skin and blackened cloth clung to the sandbags, and down in the duckboards, where water once pooled, now floated the remnants of lungs and mucus. One poor devil was still breathing when we arrived, though barely. His chest moved like something trying to escape from the inside. He had no face left, just raw meat where his eyes and mouth had been. None of us spoke. You didn't speak in a place like that. The officers had ordered a hold, no retreat, not even 5 meters back. The Germans hadn't advanced yet, but they knew what they'd done. That gas wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. You are meat now. We stacked the dead like sandbags in some places, ghastly, yes, but the line had to hold. If you stared too long, you'd see their eyes move. One man swore the pile groaned at night. Maybe it did. We rigged cloth over our faces, soaked in whatever we could, mud, urine, even kitchen grease. It didn't help. Every breath still clawed at the throat. The chlorine clung to everything, our boots, our blankets, our hands. Even when the sky cleared and the birds returned, we smelled it. That chemical ghost followed us into sleep. A few of the lads began twitching at night, waking up shrieking with arms flailing, swearing they were drowning. I believed them. I dreamed of gas, too, of yellow fog with fingers, of choking on ash. There were no quiet nights after Ypres. Even the silence had teeth. One evening, a runner stumbled in from the next trench over, face mottled blue and streaked with vomit. He tried to speak, collapsed before he could. The medics got to him, but not fast enough. Later, they found green fluid in his lungs. Not water, not blood. Something in between. Something wrong. One of the older men muttered, "That stuff changes you." He was right. It wasn't just the lungs it turned inside out. By the fourth night, the fog came again. Not as thick, but this time mixed with shell fire. A double blow. We saw the cloud rise behind the trees before the screaming began anew. Men who'd survived the first wave didn't even run. They just sat down, hands in their laps, waiting. I never knew what broke a man until I saw that, until I heard a private laugh, really laugh, as the fog rolled in, his teeth yellow and cracked. He didn't scream, he just sat there, smiling as his skin blistered and his chest buckled inward. We fought that night. We held the line. But when the sun came up and lit the trench in gray gold, there were more of us dead than standing. The ones who survived didn't cheer, didn't nod, just stared at the corpses, quietly stepping around them like they'd always been there. We never buried them. There wasn't time. And soon, you couldn't tell the difference between the dead and the waiting. It's strange what you get used to. After Ypres, after the yellow fog, the coughing fits, the gurgling deaths, after all of it, you'd think nothing could shake a man again. But you'd be wrong. Because the worst part wasn't the gas itself. It was what came after, in the quiet, in the waiting. The trenches had taken on a new sound, not the familiar whistle of shells or the distant hammer of rifles. Number now, it was the wheezing, that broken, wet sound. Survivors filled the dugouts with it, some trying to breathe, some trying not to. You could hear lungs rattle like broken bellows, Every breath sounded borrowed, and the smell. Chlorine clung to everything, but beneath that, there was something else, something sour, rotting flesh mixed with medicine, and something too sharp to name. We didn't get new replacements, just orders. Hold. Always that word. But the line wasn't holding, not really. Men walked like ghosts, shoulders hunched, mouths blackened from coughing up clots. The gas didn't just scar them, it took parts of them away. Some stopped speaking altogether. They'd stare at the sky for hours, flinching if the wind picked up. One bloke, Davies, refused to sleep lying down. Said he'd dreamed of drowning if he did. He'd sit upright in the trench wall corner nodding off, only to jerk awake screaming about lungs filling and hands clawing from under the mud. No one laughed anymore. No one dared. It wasn't long before they brought in the canisters again. We saw them, slender steel things, lined along the German front like teeth. We knew what that meant. We had longer cloths now soaked in soda water, tied around our faces like pale bandages. They were meant to help. They didn't. The second release was worse, not because the gas was heavier, but because we remembered. Every one of us flinched at the first hiss, even before the green mist crept over the fields. We knew what was coming. That was the terror, that knowing. The cloud moved like it had intelligence, curling through wire gaps, sliding down shell holes, slipping into bunkers. A thick, gleaming snake. I saw it coil around a dugout entrance and vanish into the darkness like a beast returning to its lair. The screams inside began moments later, too quick, too sudden. I tried to drag out the man closest. I got his arm, that's all I got. His skin came away in my hand, and the whisper started then. You'll think I'm mad. Maybe I am. But I swear, in the heavy gas just beyond sight, I heard them. Voices, not German, not ours, not anything human, a low chattering, almost curious, like insects picking apart a carcass. They didn't rise above the moaning, they swam beneath it, like they were watching, waiting. I asked the medic if he heard anything. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Later that night, I found Private Miller huddled under a collapsed timber plank, muttering to himself. He'd gouged at his ears with a broken tin badge. Kept saying, too loud, too close. They talk in the fog. They see you. He died 2 hours later, drowned in his own blood. We didn't move his body. No one wanted to touch him. That was the third day. The gas took the air. The silence took the rest, and whatever lived in the fog, it hadn't finished with us yet. The gas didn't just kill, it lingered. In the folds of your coat, behind your teeth, in the quiet corners of your thoughts. By the time the fourth week came, I wasn't sure who among us was still whole. We were all walking wounded. Not a man in that trench hadn't coughed blood into his sleeve at least once. But it wasn't just the body that changed, it was the way we looked at each other. We stopped calling out names, too many echoes with no answer. One night, during a lull, I was on watch near what used to be the mortar nest. It was just rubble now, coated in a greenish film. I saw movement through the haze, low and slow, like someone crawling. I raised my rifle, but something stopped me. The way it moved, it wasn't retreating or attacking, it was searching. As it drew closer, I realized it wasn't crawling, it was dragging. One arm was useless, trailing behind. The face was burned smooth. The skin, a waxy sheet, pulled tight over bone. But the uniform was British. And the thing, whatever it was trying to speak. It wasn't words, just a bubbling whisper that leaked from a ruined throat. The eyes were gone, sockets black and weeping, but it tilted its head toward me like it knew who I was. I should have helped. I should have called for a medic. But I didn't move. Couldn't. I watched it collapse silently into the mud, fingers still twitching. When I told Sergeant Blake the next morning, he just stared at me, eyes rimmed red. "That was Lieutenant Crane," he muttered. "He went missing last week. Gas took him during the second wave. We thought he'd burned up with the trench." He didn't question what I saw. None of them did anymore. Later that day, 2 men went missing from our section. No sign of shell fire, no footprints leading out. Just gone. We found their rifles propped neatly by the trench wall, bayonets cleaned, boots still laced at the foot of their cots. They left behind everything but themselves. The fog returned again that evening, not thick, but wrong. It crept like it had eyes, curling into foxholes and swallowing the sound. I watched Corporal Finch stumble toward it, arms open like a man greeting a long-lost friend. I shouted. He didn't even turn. The mist wrapped around him, and then he was gone. No scream, no struggle, just silence. Some of the lads started muttering about the hollow ones. Those the gas didn't kill, just emptied. Said they wandered between the trenches at night, still dressed in our kit, still bearing our tags, but they weren't us anymore. Something else had climbed into their skins. I didn't believe it until I saw Private Hobbs standing at the edge of the crater that used to be Section D. He died 2 weeks ago. I saw it happen, took the blast full to the chest. But there he stood, not quite breathing, not quite still, just watching. When I called his name, he didn't react, just turned and walked into the mist like it welcomed him back. That night, I didn't sleep. None of us did. We sat, rifles across our knees, listening to footsteps that didn't match any patrol, hearing coughs from empty dugouts. A whisper now and then, a scrape against wood. We told ourselves it was rats. We said it often, so we didn't have to say anything else. But deep down, we knew. The gas hadn't just taken lives. It had taken something from the earth itself, and it had left things behind in our place. They didn't call us soldiers anymore, not really. The newer officers, those who hadn't been there when the yellow fog first came, called us the old line, like we were part of the trench itself. We barely spoke, barely slept, barely ate. Our hands shook even when the gas wasn't near. Some of us wore masks now, rubber things with glass eyes and long snouts, but even with them on, the memories got in. We'd been rotated to a quieter sector near the edge of Polygon Wood. Quiet, they said. No gas for days, no major push expected. But the air never felt clean again. It always held that tang, that chemical taste like rusted coins soaked in bleach. No birds anymore, just the crunch of boots and the whisper of wind through wire. On the third night, we found a body in no man's land, one of ours, but too clean. No blood, no torn uniform, just lying flat on his back, mouth open wide, eyes gone like they'd been smoked out. We didn't know how he got there. We hadn't sent a patrol. His hands were pressed flat against his chest, like he'd tried to hold something in. His name tag was missing. We buried him in the trench wall. Couldn't risk carrying him out. That same night, Evans cracked. He stood straight up during the dusk watch, staring at nothing. Said he heard someone whispering under the duck boards. "They're still crawling," he muttered. "They're looking for air." He didn't resist when we pulled him down. Didn't sleep after, just sat shaking. whispering back to whatever it was. The gas came again on the fifth morning, not in a wave this time, just little pockets, sliding along the wind like hunting dogs. You didn't hear it right away. You smelled it. Then your skin started to sting. Then the coughing came. We tried to mask up, but the new canisters failed. Filters too thin. The chlorine got through. By noon, we were blind. Not all of us, just most. Our eyes poured thick tears, and the trenches echoed with the sound of retching and choking. Men clawed at their faces, at their throats, trying to tear the burning out. It didn't work. I saw McAllister bite off part of his own tongue, trying to breathe through it. We lost the line that afternoon, not to enemy guns, to air, to nothing. They shelled us only after the gas had done its work. We couldn't see, couldn't shoot, couldn't scream, just stumbled over the bodies of the first wave. Some were still alive, if you could call it that. Gurgling, bubbling. I remember stepping over a crater full of corpses, the chlorine still curling off their skin in little green tendrils. I slipped, fell in, landed in them. They didn't move, but I felt something grab my wrist. It didn't hold me, it touched me, as if to say, "You're next." I scrambled out, choking, vision blurred, hearing gone. Somewhere, someone was sobbing. Might have been me. That night, we were ordered to fall back. We did, but not far. There was nowhere far enough. The line behind us had gas too, new batch, thicker, deadlier. We were caught between breaths, and there, in that limbo of fog and ash, the wounded began to crawl, not to safety, not to aid, just away, like they knew what waited in the trenches wasn't rest, just more coughing, more burning, more whispers from the mist. In the final hour before dark, I looked out from a shell hole, mask cracked, lungs raw. The fog was still out there dancing low, licking the dead with lazy fingers, and in it I saw shapes, not men. Things wearing our coats, wearing our faces, moving like they'd never died. One of them turned, its eyes were black, its mouth smiled wide. I blinked, it was gone. Now the gas has cleared again. For now, I'm the only one left in this section. I think I hear breathing at night. Not mine, not anymore. And I know without doubt the fog will come back. It always does. And when it does, it won't be the chlorine that gets me. It'll be the thing wearing my face. Story 6. I remember the cold first, so sharp it cut through my lungs like glass. It was the kind of cold that made your breath vanish before your eyes could catch it. We were told it was a research center, that we would help the Empire win the war through science. I was only 16, a kitchen boy drafted into service at the edge of Harbin. They never told us what the chimneys were for. They called it Unit 731. It looked like a factory. Bricks blackened by coal smoke. Steel doors with thick bolts. Long corridors that echoed when you walked, even barefoot. I was given a mop, a bucket, and told not to speak unless spoken to. The first time I saw the operating room, I dropped the mop. The floor was streaked in brown-red stains, the kind that no amount of scrubbing would erase. On the stainless steel table lay a man, alive, but barely. His eyes twitched toward me. Then the mask came down, not to protect him, but to keep doctors clean. No anesthesia, only silence. They had a name for the subjects, Maruta, logs, just like wood to be burned, cut, opened. I didn't understand at first. why the screams came at night, why some rooms had drains in the center of the floor, or why one morning a frost-bitten man was dragged out and his arms snapped like dry bamboo when it hit the doorframe. One winter, I was told to help a scientist named Ito. He had a gentle voice but eyes that never blinked. He led me to a holding cell where a woman sat curled around her belly. She was pregnant. They brought her in because she had fresh life inside. They wanted to see how disease spread through blood, through breath, through bone. I wasn't allowed to speak to her, but she looked at me once, and I still see her eyes every night I close mine. The worst job was the brain room. They told me to collect pieces after each neurological test. The scalpels were left on trays, still wet. I'd sweep the bits into a tin pan, gagging as I worked. Sometimes there were jars lined along the wall, hands, heads, sometimes eyes still open inside the glass, preserved, labeled, forgotten. The doctors wore white coats. They laughed in the halls. Some of them had families back home. One of them patted my head once, said I was a good helper. That night, I vomited in the snow behind the building, but no one ever cried, not even the victims. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they were too far gone. Or maybe, like me, they had learned the rule that ruled over all. Never make a sound, not even when it hurts, not even when you break. Because inside Unit 731, the silence was colder than death. And it never left you. It never will. They moved me to Block 8 in the spring, when the snow began to rot underfoot and the air smelled of wet metal. The others called it the breeding room, though none of us knew exactly why until the experiments began. I wish I hadn't learned. The hallway there was narrower, dimmer, its lights yellowed, flickering, as if even electricity refused to stay too long. The guards were more serious in this block, their faces tighter, more grim. One nodded to me once. I tried to smile back, but his eyes held no recognition, only calculation, like he was measuring my parts, not my presence. Inside the lab, the captives were separated by glass walls, some barely adults, others older men and women. One cell held a couple, a man chained to a cot, his skin blistered with red spots, and a woman, pregnant, trembling, her arms wrapped around her stomach. I found out later, the man had been injected with cholera 2 days before. The woman had not. She was the experiment. There was a clipboard on the wall next to the cell. It didn't list names, just numbers, times, symptoms. Beside it hung a stopwatch. I saw a doctor press it as soon as the air vent opened between the two rooms. I watched, helpless, as the woman began coughing hours later, then vomiting, then twitching. They timed everything. Some days I had to escort carts to the disposal furnace. The carts were covered with canvas, but I could see the outlines underneath. Slumped forms, some curled like children sleeping, others rigid, arms outstretched. Once, the canvas slipped as we hit a crack in the tile. An arm fell free, purple and crusted in sores. I bent down to fix it. The fingers were still warm. Other rooms had no windows, only metal tables with shackles, long hoses hanging from the walls, and wooden crates stacked in corners. I once opened one, curious. It was full of rats, alive, furious, scratching at the slats. Later that day, I overheard the scientists say they were feeding the rats' blood from infected prisoners, watching which ones lived, watching which ones changed. The worst came when they brought in children. They didn't cry at first. Most were too sick, too confused. Some still wore school clothes. One girl had pigtails and carried a cloth doll. They took her from her mother in front of me. The mother screamed until her throat bled. They both vanished into different rooms. I never saw either again. After one shift, I stayed late to clean a room they called B4. Inside, I found a notebook left behind on a desk. It wasn't in code. It listed subjects and experiments, dates of injection, weight of infected tissue, time of organ removal. There was a line that haunts me still. Fetus removed at 8 months, exposed to anthrax in utero. Time to death, 43 minutes. My hand shook as I turned the page. I couldn't read more. I hid the notebook behind a vent grate, thinking maybe one day someone would find it. Maybe someone would believe us. But the truth is, most who left this place never spoke again. And most who stayed never left at all. In Block 8, death didn't come suddenly. It arrived in doses, through coughing, through contact, through breath. And every second of it was written down, measured, and called science. The first time I heard it, I thought it was the sound of machinery. Deep, rhythmic pounding beneath the floorboards of Block 10. But then it came again, slower, wetter, as if someone were dragging a heavy sack through waterlogged cloth. I learned later it was the chamber below. Not many workers ever saw it. Fewer returned with anything to say. I was assigned down there after 2 orderlies fell ill and never came back. The guard said nothing, just tossed me a fresh apron, told me to follow. The staircase was narrow, hidden behind a wall panel that looked like part of the ventilation system. As I descended, the air thickened, heavy with mold and iron. At the bottom was a sealed steel door. They opened it with a key I never saw again. The room inside was windowless. The walls sweated. Strange green stains crept down the corners, and in the center stood what I would later call the pressure cell. A thick glass cylinder, bolted with metal clamps, tubes feeding in from all directions. A woman was inside when I arrived. She was seated, barely clothed, hands tied to her knees with thick leather straps. A doctor adjusted the dial, and I watched as the pressure rose slowly. Her face stretched, her lips peeled back from her teeth. Blood welled in her eyes like red ink in clear water. When it was over, they recorded her final heart rate on a clipboard, then signaled for me to bring in the mop. That day, I learned how long it took to clean brain matter off glass. Each time I returned, the subjects changed. Sometimes it was an old man with a breathing tube clamped to his face. Other times, it was a child no older than 10, trembling under a cold light. They tested every variable: altitude simulation, decompression, even vacuum exposure. I once saw a man's chest implode like wet paper. He had been laughing minutes before, or maybe it was crying. In the chamber, they sounded the same, but the worst wasn't the experiments. It was the recordings. I was tasked with organizing footage, filing it in reels labeled only by number and date. I remember one, Reel 47A. It showed 3 prisoners strapped to upright boards while canisters pumped in white gas. No sound, just silent twitching. Then stillness. Another reel showed diseased men held in line as fleas were poured over their shoulders from bamboo tubes. They were told to stay still, not to swat. One man resisted. A guard cracked his shin with a metal rod. He stopped moving. Behind the chamber was a small storage vault. I wasn't supposed to enter, but I did once when no one was looking. It was filled with crates, rows and rows of them. I pried one open. Inside were small glass vials, each labeled with strange characters and numbers. One had a thick black sludge inside, another held something like pale dust. I didn't touch them. I didn't breathe too deeply. Later, I heard they used those on whole villages. By then, I couldn't sleep. The cold sweat returned each night, followed by visions of eyes bulging behind glass, of bodies floating in tanks, of lungs forced to rupture while men in white scribbled notes. And always that sound, the dragging, the wet scraping beneath my feet. The chamber still echoes in me, not in sound, but in memory, like something buried too deep to claw its way free, but close enough that I feel it breathing. Down there, they didn't ask how much pain a human could endure. They asked how much could be measured, and I was the one who wrote it down. They called it a field test. That was the phrase used in the dispatch. I was no longer cleaning floors. By then, I wore a gray armband and was assigned to logistics, transporting materials to the outer facilities. But I had heard the whispers: plague dispersal, live release, observation zones. When they loaded the trucks that morning, I understood. The crates looked like ordinary supplies, wooden boxes bound in rope, marked with odd symbols, but they buzzed. You could hear them squirming inside. I asked once what they were. The officer smirked. Fleas, he said. Special ones. We drove through the mountains under the cover of mist. A convoy of 3 trucks, no markings, no flags. When we arrived at the village, it was eerily quiet. No soldiers, just civilians. Old men chopping firewood, children chasing chickens, mothers hanging clothes under trees. They smiled at us at first. I looked away. The men in masks got out first. They carried the crates into the center of the village and opened them with careful hands. The air seemed to ripple. Then came the black cloud, tiny darting shapes exploding into the wind, racing toward anything warm. The villagers stood frozen, confused. A child laughed and tried to catch one. His mother screamed. By then it was too late. We left within minutes. 2 weeks later, I was part of the team that returned to collect data. I begged not to go, but no one refused orders at Unit 731. We wore thick suits, masks sealed to our faces, rubber gloves that made our hands sweat instantly. The village was silent again, but different. The air stank of rot and boiled rice. No fires burned, no dogs barked. The homes were full of corpses. Some slumped in chairs, faces blackened and bloated. Others lay twisted on the ground, limbs stiff and raw. One house had 4 bodies stacked like firewood. A notebook near the door had tally marks, perhaps the last thing one of them tried to count before delirium took hold. We walked street by street, taking notes, measuring temperatures, swabbing mouths. In one barn, we found a woman still breathing, barely. Her eyes had ruptured from fever. She mumbled through a shredded throat, fingers scratching at her own skin, tearing it loose. I froze. One of the officers stepped forward and ended it with an injection. Too late, he said. Too far gone. Back at the facility, the data was reviewed, samples stored, and bodies reduced to ash. A map was pinned on the wall with red circles around every successful zone. I heard the scientists talk about expanding to rivers next, dropping cholera into wells, mixing bacteria with grains. It wasn't enough to test on bodies. They wanted to watch a population fall apart from the inside out. I stopped eating. I couldn't sleep without hearing the buzzing again, without seeing that little boy laugh just before he died. When I closed my eyes, I saw the woman's hands, peeling herself apart as if trying to escape her own skin. I started dreaming in numbers, subject counts, infection rates, mortality curves. One day, I caught sight of my own reflection in the decontamination mirror. I looked like them, white coat, clipboard, mask. But inside, something had cracked. I was no longer afraid of dying. I was afraid of surviving this and forgetting, because that village had a name. But in our records, it was just a code. Site 44K, all those lives reduced to an experiment, and I helped write the report. The final days were not filled with panic. They were orderly, precise, just like everything else inside Unit 731. Rumors spread quietly about the Soviets advancing, about the Empire losing ground, but no alarms were sounded. Instead, orders came down with terrifying calm. Destroy the evidence. Burn it all. They started with the specimen rooms. Formalin jars were dumped into pits, their contents shoveled in behind them, limbs, organs, fetal remains. The smell coated your lungs, clung to your skin. I was tasked with breaking glass slides from the pathology lab, trays and trays of stained tissue under cracked glass, blood and bile and nerve fragments preserved in numbers, thousands of them, each a life reduced to a smear. Then came the bodies. Some were frozen, sealed in storage like meat. Others were still warm. No one asked how. We carried them to the incinerators two at a time, boots slipping in the mixture of ash and slush that pooled at the base of the chimneys. One of the guards joked it was snow made of sins. No one laughed. They gave us gasoline for the files, stacks of documents, reports, images. I watched flames curl the edges of photographs, close-ups of infected eyes, swollen tongues, opened rib cages. In one picture, a man looked directly at the camera as his abdomen was spread apart, as if he knew even the lens was complicit. Outside, they herded the last remaining prisoners into trucks. Some were gagged, others blindfolded. A few simply stared forward, blank, as if they had already left whatever world they once knew. I locked eyes with one, a boy, maybe 12. His face was scabbed and raw, but his gaze was steady. I'll never forget it. I don't know where they took him. I never saw the trucks return. The burn room itself was where they destroyed the final specimens. It had no windows, only a chute, a furnace, and a silence broken only by the roar of fire. I helped feed the last crates, rat cages, flea samples, sealed canisters of bacteria. One cracked in my hand. My glove split. The fluid hissed on the floor like acid. I never told anyone. As the facility emptied, I wandered through the deserted corridors. Rooms I had never entered were suddenly unguarded. In one, I found an entire wall covered in inked charts, maps of China, marked with red dots. Each dot a village, a test, a burial. In another, I saw a row of mannequins dressed in protective suits, staring blankly from behind glass. But they weren't mannequins. Their eyes were too human. On the last night, before we were ordered to evacuate, I crept into the autopsy room one final time. The table was clean, polished, no blood, no scraps, just an echo. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the overhead light humming above me. I remembered every scream I didn't hear because the walls were thick. Every breath I had watched fog up the glass between cages, every number I had written, every label I had typed. When the trucks came to take us away, no one spoke. The building stood behind us like a mausoleum of silence, full of ash and secrets. I didn't look back, but even now I still smell the smoke. It wasn't just flesh that burned, it was memory, names, truth. and the lie that it could ever be buried deep enough to stay dead.